Just that morning, she managed to squeeze into her jeans, which led to the cry of victory that I heard in the kitchen. Rosie also got a boost to her already good mood when she received excellent feedback on her work. She is a conscientious worker and was able to complete a difficult, rather complex project on time. Her bosses noticed this and made it clear that she had done a good job and was in line for a promotion. So, between getting into her jeans and having a blast at work, she was super excited about her wonderful day and greeted me at the door with a huge smile, a big hug, and a big kiss, then invited me to celebrate in the bedroom after the kids had gone to bed. I agreed without hesitation. Despite her small stature, Rosie could be quite an athletic girl in bed and was more than willing to take matters into her own hands. She could ride me like a cowboy or buck me like a rodeo horse, and when she wrapped her legs around my waist, it felt like I was being grabbed by an anaconda. By then, on any given night when we finished, we were both completely exhausted, covered in sweat, and could barely catch our breath. But that evening she was especially energetic and took everything into her own hands from the very beginning. We played the first round quickly and both reached the finish line. However, she was not going to let me rest after one time, and after a very short break, she took care of my manhood. Once I was ready, we started the second round. It always takes me a long time to climax the second time, and Rosie took advantage of this by reaching the finish line twice, all the while encouraging me, screaming my name, combined with any number of endearments and epithets, screaming that she loved me, loved my technique, loved my body. By the time we finished having sex, I was wrung out like a wet rag. I lay next to her, breathing heavily, trying to keep my eyes open, feeling as satisfied as a man could. Rosie pressed herself close to me and whispered quiet, lewd compliments about how well I had done and that she hoped I could say the same. I turned to her, stroked her face a couple of times, and laughed quietly. "Yeah, I think it's fair to say you did a good job too." The office environment remained tense, with an almost palpable sense of anxiety and anger, leading to an atmosphere of terribly poor cooperation, accompanied by lower-level arguments that threatened to escalate into outright shouting any day. Everyone seemed to be on edge, fearing the consequences of Terry's recently proposed policy changes. I managed to disrupt some of Terry's plans, at least briefly, by asking HR to conduct a formal review of any new management proposals that might result in disciplinary action. I knew it would buy time, but if Terry didn't change her mind, Gabe and a few of the other guys on her crap list were going to end up in trouble sooner or later. A couple of weeks after this uneasy truce, I was eating lunch alone outside, trying to enjoy a few minutes of sunshine, when Devin plopped down next to me with a grin that even the Cheshire Cat would have considered over the top. "I have something I think you should see." He was clearly eager to show off what he had done, so I held up my finger as a sign that I couldn't speak and chewed as slowly as possible, trying my best to irritate him. Finally, I had to stop my passive-aggressive chewing and look at the evidence. "Are you saying you got Terry Lee into bed?" I asked, directly. "Oh yes," he said, still wearing his incredibly annoying smile. "I actually patted her on the butt twice." He patted his shirt pocket where his cell phone lay. "And I have the proof right here. Evidence in exchange for $500. I leaned back and crossed my arms, looking at him doubtfully. They must be good. No blurry photos that could have been taken from a porn site. "Oh, that's true. They are very good, very clear." He waved his phone, clicked on a couple of icons, and began scrolling through his photos. "How about this one?" He handed me the phone with his eyebrows raised in anticipation. The photo was as explicit as any porn I had ever encountered, and if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would have found it hard to believe. There was Terry Lee, on her knees and elbows, with her head down, her teeth clenched and her eyes closed, and Devin crouched behind her. The moment of intercourse was clearly visible. She was wearing a fancy red garter belt and stockings, and the foot that was visible in the photo was wearing a red high-heeled shoe. Devin was seen holding his cell phone in the picture, and the photo was obviously taken using a well-placed mirror. The expression on his face was purely mocking. His tongue stuck out, his eyes wide open in feigned conspiratorial surprise. I said. He laughed. That's not all. Go ahead, scroll through the photos. There were probably 10 pictures of him having sex with Terry, and 3 or 4 of her working on his manhood. The photographs were enlightening. At work, Terry is a proper and arrogant bitch. But in these photos, she was completely out of control. Her makeup was smeared, her hair was disheveled, and her facial expression bore no resemblance to what she had shown in the office. She looked like lust personified, and I had to marvel at Devon's ability to recognize and uncover the slut that obviously lived somewhere deep inside Terry Lee's heart. When I looked up, Devon was still grinning, his arms open in an expectant gesture. "I think you owe me," he said with a wink. I slowly nodded my head and smiled. Yes, I probably should," I admitted reluctantly, drawing out the words slowly, trying my best to sound casual. I took a few minutes to congratulate him and admit that I had lost the bet and underestimated his abilities. I had to give him the win because in the end he obviously deserved it fair and square. So I resigned myself and groaned loudly as I opened my wallet and pulled out a couple $100, which I counted out into his open palm while he smiled like a triumphant Caesar. I was going to pay him the rest the next day, but I decided that I could complete the surrender right now. So I took him to the ATM in the office lobby, where I pulled out 3 more bills and handed them over. I shook his hand, smiled, and congratulated him again, trying to be polite. Losing always hurts, but this loss was cushioned by the fact that it allowed for an even greater victory in a more important situation in the future. I admitted my failure and lost $500 on a bet, but I smiled as I went back to work. I discovered that knowing about Terry's indiscretions and actually doing something about it are 2 very different things. After thinking about the different ways information can become a useful weapon in the workplace, I realized that no matter how it is used, it essentially amounts to a form of blackmail. There's no way around the fact that I'll be holding something over her head to force her to do things my way. I thought about talking about my dilemma with Rosie or someone at work, but I was sure that they would think badly of me if I went into detail about what I had already done, not to mention the fact that I was thinking about what to do with the information that I have now. Therefore, for several nights and days, I remained unconvinced and suffered, looking for answers, looking at the door of my office or at the ceiling of my bedroom. Gradually, the better side of my nature took over, and I decided to discard the idea of using what I knew against Terry. However, my new decision to follow a high moral path did not last long. The day after I finally decided to do the right thing, she brought her guns to bear again at. However, my new decision to follow a high moral path did not last long. The day after I finally decided to do the right thing, she brought her guns to bear again at another highly contentious staff meeting, announcing that she was working closely with HR and that they were starting to see things differently. She presented a list of at least 10 employees led by Gabe Prince, whom she intended to punish, regardless of the opinions of everyone present. The usual arguments ensued, but this time I was just fuming quietly, while the idea of talking to her about a date quickly became more and more attractive. At the end of the meeting, everyone stupidly left the room, leaving Terry and I alone. I silently watched her collect her papers until she began to feel awkward. "What happened, Grant? Nothing to say? Finally admitting there's a behavior problem here?" I cleared my throat and began to speak slowly, almost formally. "I noticed, Terry, that everyone on this list is male, and that the main complaint against most of them is that they violate some kind of harassment policy." "Well, let's be honest, Grant. Look at what's happening. The men in this company treat women in the workplace as if they were some kind of decoration for their own pleasure rather than valuable colleagues. This is completely unacceptable. And frankly, since women simply don't violate sexual harassment policies the same way men do, it shouldn't surprise anyone that the list is all men. Face it, This bad behavior is written on the Y chromosome. Is it true? I said, raising my eyebrows in disbelief. Do you seriously think that women are not susceptible to problems of sexual harassment? The vast majority of them. Well, let's see. Men tend to have little control over their libido, which ends up making them act like a bunch of college kids. This is a business grant and not a brotherhood, where any behavior is within limits. You must know. I had enough and raised my hand to interrupt her. Holy crap, Terry, you sure make a lot of accusations about a woman's uncontrollable male libido when you've been fucking yourself. She backed away from me as if she had been threatened with a gun, her face a combination of outrage and fear. Are you accusing me of something? Well, yes, I guess so. I accuse you, I believe, of extreme hypocrisy. Well, that is, that you spend all this time judging some men for their boorish behavior, priding yourself as the superior morality over guys like Gabe and me, and yet, all this time, you are very enthusiastic about taking forbidden positions with such a partner as Devin Tinian. She narrowed her eyes at me, trying to kill me with her gaze, before hissing back, "Whatever Devin said, it's bullshit. He's just like the rest of you, making up bullshit to get a slap on the back from the other local hillbillies." I laughed at this. You know, you might be able to make some of your little followers believe this, but I saw the pictures. She was clearly shocked by this statement and looked stunned but slightly doubtful. I leaned closer. Photos on Devin's cell phone, photos of you and him taken at Drury Inn. She shook her head slowly, still in denial. Honestly, Terry, I never thought of you as a garter girl. But hey, I guess I never thought you'd jump into bed with someone from work, what with your endless lectures about professionalism and all that. For the first time since I've known her, Terry was simply speechless. She glared at me, furrowing her eyebrows and flaring her nostrils in anger, but no sound came from behind her clenched teeth. I silently smiled back as smugly and triumphantly as I could, trying my best to enjoy her discomfort. I saw the wheels turning and knew that she was carefully considering my words, what exactly I knew, and what consequences that knowledge might have for her. Over the next few moments, I watched this realization reflected in her expression, changing from surprise to contempt to anger, and then finally to something I had never seen in her before, sadness or regret born of fear. Her chin trembled, her eyes became moist. She nervously bit her lips, opened her mouth a couple of times without saying anything. Finally, she cried like a little child, and real tears streamed down her face. She stood up abruptly and took a couple steps away from me, shaking her head and pointing a trembling finger, as if she had just found out that I was the Antichrist, and then she turned and literally ran out of the room. I thought I could feel some satisfaction from this small victory, from having the upper hand in this strange game of chess we were playing. But for some reason I felt empty and more than a little ashamed. I'll never know for sure how much of an impact the threat of me finding out about her exploits with Devin had. But Terry had slowed down her campaign to punish Gabe. In the end, she agreed to a compromise in which a probationary letter would be placed in his personnel file, which would be removed after 6 months if he took sensitivity classes and kept his nose and jokes clean. But Terry is not one to take defeat lying down, so I knew there would be an attempt at retaliation, and I assumed it would be directed at me personally. It didn't take long for this to happen. The counterattacks began a week after I told Terry about her missteps with Devin. At first, I thought that maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe I was looking too hard for a trap. But gradually, it became obvious that something all too real was happening. 3 or 4 young girls at work, all Terry's friends, suddenly began wearing relatively provocative clothes, deep necklines, high hems of skirts, stockings peeking out from under the hems. And suddenly, there seemed to be a lot of things on the floor around my workstation that they could pick up, because they were all bending over to reveal ample cleavage, beautiful tanned legs, and well-developed loins pressed tightly against jeans or skirts. Don't get me wrong, I didn't mind watching a little. But I am very sensitive to the game that was being played, so I was careful not to watch too much. and was extremely careful not to say anything about it at all. In fact, it became so clear that her subordinates were on guard to catch me in any compromising situation that I watched virtually everything I did or said to ensure that nothing could be construed as an inappropriate invitation, hint, or suggestion. After several weeks of successful opposition on the lower level, I was subjected to a series of frontal attacks. The first happened when I was having a late sandwich snack in the dining room alone. One of the secretaries, a very beautiful young brunette with sparkling eyes and a plump but very well-developed body, sat down next to me and began to eat an ice cream cone. Only she didn't so much eat him as make love to him. She licked a mound of vanilla ice cream as if it were an aroused manhood, and when she sometimes took a bite, she did it only with her lips, as if half kissing, half sucking the ice cream. I had a general idea of what would happen next, but I was curious how she would feel about it. Very, very tasty, she purred with a sort of seductive grin, some vanilla ice cream forming a large, creamy white drop on her bottom lip. Yeah, you seem to like it, I said, stating the obvious as impartial as possible. She smiled even wider. My name is Kim Johnson, and I'm new here. Aren't you Grant Simmons? Yes. Would you like to lick it? She asked, handing me the cone and simultaneously leaning forward until her face was less than 30 centimeters from mine. It's very, very tasty. I promise you'll like it. At this moment, I almost laughed. It was the kind of invitation that all single and most married red-blooded American men dream of, but I saw it for what it was. I leaned quite close and quietly whispered back, Do you know what you should do with this ice cream? What? Give part of the horn to Terry for safekeeping. It's cold enough that the ice cream wouldn't melt, even if she held it in her mouth. I pulled away, smiled at her, and walked out of the dining room, waving to the security camera as I left. A couple of weeks after this, I was leaving the office after closing late when I noticed one of the secretaries was still sitting at her desk after everyone else had left. She cried quietly, burying her head in her hand folded on the table. I was going to give her privacy and sneak out quietly, but she seemed so upset that I felt compelled to ask what was wrong. At the sound of my voice, she jumped slightly and raised her head, showing traces of tears and bloodshot eyes. She shook her head when I asked if I could help, but she was so upset that I sat down and tried to figure out what was wrong and cheer her up. She looked completely broken and didn't want to talk through her sobs. But over time, she calmed down and warmed up a little, and I gradually coaxed the story out of her. Just that morning, the guy she thought she'd marry turned out to be an asshole, dumping her abruptly and saying some nasty things on the way to meet his best piece of ass. Apparently, he had never been a particularly nice guy, and some of the things she said about him seemed almost beyond cruel, and she made me feel worse and worse. Almost an hour after this conversation, she was still crying and almost inconsolable, and I reached out to hug her. She didn't resist at all and simply melted in my arms, resting her head on my shoulder. Her body was full and soft, and I could feel her breath on my neck, coming in the form of quiet little sighs. Her vulnerability was almost palpable, and I felt myself reacting to it, pulling her closer. But when I hugged her, she went limp in my arms and pressed herself against my body with a subtle sensuality that set off a distant alarm that made me remember what my grandfather, a family practice doctor, had told me about being careful with female patients. There is nothing more seductive, he said, than women's tears. The memory made me tense, and I reconsidered the strange coincidence that had found me alone with an attractive, dejected girl whose vulnerability led to close physical contact and brought me dangerously close to violating workplace rules at a suspiciously inopportune time. Suddenly, I realized that I had been set up again. I resolutely pushed her away from me and looked carefully into her face. She bit her lip worriedly and sobbed, and I smiled and nodded at her. You really are a first-class actress. Vulnerability instantly gave way to puzzlement, her mouth and eyes opening wide. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if I could, I would give you an Oscar for your acting. Let Terry know it's not your fault I didn't take the bait. Indeed, you were very good." She tried to return the vulnerable look for a moment, but then gave in, pursing her lips in disappointment before smiling weakly. "Well, damn it, I tried my best. For a minute I thought I had you." I laughed quietly to myself at her confession. "Try the community theater," I said as I walked out, slowly shaking my head. "You really are a natural." Over the next few months, things seemed to calm down, and in the absence of any other real attempts to cause problems, I concluded that Terry had decided to call the dogs off and live with the situation as it was. I was wrong. About 3 months after I told her about my affair with Devin Tinian, Terry Lee asked for a staff meeting and invited half a dozen other managers. The meeting was quite successful, efficient, and productive, without any real conflicts. When it ended, Terry asked me to stay with her to discuss some personnel issues. To my surprise, everything went smoothly, and for the first time in as long as I can remember, we made decisions together, easily and naturally. When our meeting ended, I felt the need to say something positive, hoping it would be a new beginning. "Look, Terry, I know we've had our differences, and I'm sorry things got out of hand in the past, but I think we've been productive lately. I know we don't see eye to eye on everything, but I like to think we're moving in the right direction." She looked at me mysteriously. "Well, Grant, that's one of the reasons I wanted this meeting, to get things moving." She paused for a moment, and I caught a glimpse of a mysterious smile that made me think. "And I just wanted to tell you that in the end, I think you were right. I was hoping for a thaw in our relationship, but something was very wrong here, and her accidental confession embarrassed me almost to the point of insensibility. I had no idea how to feel about what she just said, and I started stuttering. You thought I was right?" "Oh yeah, I've thought about our differences, and after reviewing all the information available, I believe you were right about some things." "In some... What? What? Is it about relaxing the rules a little to boost morale? What? Oh no, not this." She looked at me carefully, and a smug expression slowly appeared on her face. "That's it, Schadenfreude." My confusion gave way to a sudden surge of suspicion, tinged with a certain horror. "Then what about is that women can be just as two-faced in their relationships as men?" For a moment I thought she was referring to her own indiscretion, tacitly admitting that her personal failures had played a role in changing her mind. But her increasingly smug smile put an end to that thought process, and I realized there was something else going on, something I didn't know about, something bad. She waited patiently for my answer, clearly enjoying the growing discomfort her mysterious behavior was creating. I didn't want to play along with her, but I didn't see a way out, and, contrary to common sense, I asked the question that was hanging in the air. "So, what exactly made you change your mind?" "I thought you'd never ask," she said with a wink, and began rummaging through her work backpack until she pulled out a standard manila envelope and purposefully handed it to me across the table. I just looked at it, not wanting to see what was inside. "What is this?" "Oh, just some information that I thought you might be interested in. Let's take a look. I think you'll find it very informative." With deliberate ease, I opened the envelope and took out half a dozen sheets of paper. These were photographs printed from a digital camera or mobile phone, apparently taken in a massage room at the gym. There stood Devin Tinian in all his arrogant glory, sweetie, smug and smiling at the camera as he took his latest conquest from behind. But it was not Devin who attracted my attention, but the woman located in front and below him. She was naked, her long brown hair tied in a ponytail falling to one side of her completely recognizable face. Her eyes were closed and she had an inscrutable expression, somewhere between a grimace and a sad smile, and the vision of her struck me like a knife in the chest. It was Rosie, continued in the next video. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell so you don't miss the second final part. The link to the second part will be in the description of this video below. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.